What is going on, everybody? I am really excited for today's video where I will be ranking 103 NFL wide receivers. Buckle up, gonna be a really fun one. Before we do get started, I think it's just as important to break down what my tiers are for this video as it is to discuss the wide receivers themselves. So let's go through it. My top tier are going to be your elite alpha wide receivers, your true do-it-all receivers who can threaten all three levels of the defense, short, intermediate, and deep, win tough catches, produce after the catch, and just overall handle the offense being truly funneled through this player. Pretty self-explanatory, but these are your top of the top dogs. Then I have in tier 2, also alpha wide receivers that fit the description, but guys that stop just short of the overall dynamism, production, and consistency maybe of a tier 1 player. Tier 3, this one gets a little bit more murky, but these are guys that are definitely good enough to be the best wide receiver on an NFL team in any sort of good situation. And they're guys whose production might even equal that of a tier 2 wide receiver, but these are guys that do definitely have a more narrow skill set. For example, a guy that can't run the full route tree or doesn't produce after the catch or can't consistently win tough catches. So these guys do require either a running mate, someone within this tier, or a true number 2 wide receiver, which is our next tier, or a good complement of teammates who can provide the skill sets that this guy can't. A perfect example of some guys that would be in this tier would be maybe a DK Metcalf, a super explosive, freaky wide receiver who does need route runners and slot options to complement what he can't do. Or maybe a Deebo Samuel will fall into this tier. And absolutely maybe the best of the best in terms of run after the catch, but not the route runner or consistent hands of a lot of other wide receivers. So needs someone like an Ayuk to complement him. Those are the types of players that would fall into this tier. Tier 4, true number 2 wide receivers. This is where you draw the line of guys that just haven't quite shown that they are good enough to be justified as a team's best wide receiver on his team, but definitely dynamic players who any team would be happy to have as their number 2 player. Then you've got tier 5, which are your role-specific good NFL starters. And this is when you hear me on this channel all the time talking about having a group of weapons that includes complementary skill sets. So these are going to be your good starters that are guys that kind of need to be put into a specific role to be at their best. And this is actually going to be split into 4 different groups. Group 1 is going to be ascending young players, guys with alpha potential. Maybe someone like Malik Neighbors might fall into this tier who hasn't quite shown that he's higher than this yet. Then you've got your X's and Z's, 2 very different skill sets, but for simplicity's sake, I wanted to lump those guys together. These are going to be a lot of your possession wide receivers, whether they're really good route runners or big-bodied guys on the outside. Made sense to kind of lump those 2 guys together. Then you've got your slot and playmaker types. Obviously, slot-specific starters and, kind of gadget players that are really good with the ball in their hands. And then group number 4 is your true vertical threats. So a lot of nuance going on with that tier, but I do think that's pretty consistent with how NFL teams kind of view what a good starter is when put into the right role. Then tier 6, these are your capable starters. Find enough players who can be a part of the starting lineup, but you're probably wishing you got a little bit more from these guys. And these are either going to be good ascending prospects that haven't established themselves as anything more quite yet, and your kind of career wide receiver 3 types. Then tier 7, guys that probably shouldn't be starting unless you're talking about those intriguing prospects that you're trying to get playing time and find out what they are. But beyond that, wide receiver 4s and utility players, pretty self-explanatory there for the bottom tier. So with that out of the way, if you guys could please hit that like button as we get started, really does help me out. Takes just a second. It's a great way to support this channel. Get this video out in front of as many eyes as possible. I really appreciate it. But let's go ahead and get started. And by the way, I am doing this on the fly. I have not prepped this list, so might be some internal debates going forward here, but I enjoy doing it this way. And I want to let you guys know there's a link down below for this entire setup. Thanks to Tiermaker.com. If you want to build your own lists, I just ask if you're sharing it out on social media. If you could give me a little bit of credit, I really appreciate it. But Also, I'm coming to you from the future because halfway through this recording, I noticed finally that I had the top tier typed in incorrectly. I don't know how I didn't see it for the first half of this video, but I do catch it. I see that it's in there. Gets fixed halfway through the video. Just a heads up on that. Let's get started. Alphabetically speaking, Davante Adams, kind of a tough one because you're talking about a former elite alpha type that is on the decline. I think at this point, you probably put him in the 1 of 2 category. He's there with Garrett Wilson. Obviously, the Jets are such a disaster, and he hasn't quite been the old Davante. So he's definitely, starting to trickle down a little bit. You could maybe make an argument that he's already arrived at the true number 2 category. But out of respect for where he's been in his career, I'm going to leave him in this 1 of 2 category, though he'll probably end up more towards the bottom of it. And I am going to sort this left to right. So the guys on the further on the right will be, lower ranking within the tier. All right, Jordan Addison. If you asked me before the season, I might have plugged him in as a true number 2. I'm kind of lower on Jordan Addison right now. A lot of off the field stuff. He just hasn't quite been that guy. And Sam Darnold's been slinging it. It's not really an excuse of quarterback play. I actually would probably slot him here as a good Z wide receiver. I don't think he's a true number 2. I think he's somewhere between a 2 and a 3, which, that's what this role specific good starters are. Not your high end 2s, but 2s and 3s. So I think that's where I would put Jordan Addison. As a Z wide receiver, he can line up in the slot, can line up outside, he can get open. He's going to end up towards the top of this group, but I don't think he's quite a true number 2 at this point in time. Okay, Brandon Ayuk. This is an alpha. Someone that, last year played at this category, but I need multiple seasons of that level of play to put a guy up there. But by definition, this is a player that can threaten all 3 levels, a rack threat, wins tough catches. A tough start to this season, though, and then the injury, though. So obviously that isn't enough to get him up into that top tier. Keenan Allen, kind of back to the Davante Adams conversation, although I'm even a little bit lower on Keenan. It's tough. Similar to Davante, he's in a situation that hasn't exactly been fruitful. But I don't think the tape is quite as good on Keenan Allen in terms of separation ability. And he's, Adams is coming down from this category. Keenan's coming down from, somewhere in between these two. I really think Keenan is a true number 2 at this point, and even declining into maybe just like a really good slot guy. But similar with Davante, out of respect for what he's done and knowing that the Bears aren't the most fruitful situation, I will put him as a true number 2. Now, before we go any further, I got to tell you guys about my friends over at SeatGeek, the sponsor for today's video. This is the best time for sports. We got NBA just picking up, NHL, of course, NFL season in full swing. If you're going to concerts, SeatGeek is the place to go. Speaking from experience, using all the different ticketing apps, this is where you're going to find the best tickets at the best price with the best user interface that color codes every seat to show you the best value. Just look for the green dots and you are getting the most bang for your buck. They also are really good at showing you images in terms of what your seats are actually going to look like. I also love SeatGeek compared to other apps because in terms of the convenience of making sure you get your tickets actually in the SeatGeek app instead of having to jump through a bunch of different email chains to secure your seats, you'll get it right there in the app in a timely manner so that your experience getting through the gate is as seamless as possible. And I have happily represented SeatGeek on this channel for over 5 years now. And for that reason, many of you have probably already used my promo code for those that have been around the channel for a long time. Well, SeatGeek has agreed to set up a new code so that not just new viewers of the channel, but anybody that has used the old code can go in and get that discount once again. The new code is TFG10 at checkout. You'll save 10% on that next purchase, and you will support my channel in the process. This is a win-win if you're going to games, you want to support the channel. Again, TFG10 is the code at SeatGeek, and let's get back to ranking wide receivers. Okay, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's an alpha, an absolute alpha, one of the best wide receivers in the league, truly. He's been a little bit more quiet this year. I feel like they're spreading the ball around a little bit more. Still having a great year, but yeah, he's the best overall slot wide receiver in the league. But he gets himself out of this category because he's so good at winning tough catches. His just overall impact on the game, like some of the run blocks he has, some of the high awareness moments he has, and then of course the run after catch ability is just insane. You could argue for a 1 of 2 because he really does need, you want to have more vertical threats to complement him. But that just, at this point, just feels disrespectful to Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's an alpha by nature, in my opinion. And another thing is, these guys, I say, need to threaten all 3 levels of the field. I think we've seen enough of Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can line up you can line him up from the slot, run a slot fade. He's got a good release off the line of scrimmage. He's not gonna kill you deep all the time, but you still have to respect him as a vertical threat because of his ball skills and his route running. So I definitely am comfortable with Amon-Ra in this category. I would put him behind Ayuk, though, just because Ayuk, from what we saw last year, is a little bit more dynamic in terms of the speed. Okay, Tutu Atwell. This is going to be kind of the definition of kind of a utility player. I like Tutu Atwell, though. I wanted to include him because he's kind of underrated. He produces when the Rams go his way. A limited player, probably not someone you want as your starting 3, but as a wide receiver 4, I really don't mind having Tutu Atwell. Calvin Austin, I would love to put him in here as a good vertical threat. I don't think he's quite established that. Even here as like a capable starter, I don't know. I really like Calvin Austin. I like what we've seen. I think he's in a good spot in Pittsburgh. But I'm going to have to put him as an intriguing prospect at this point. And I'm going to put him, if we're ranking these guys how good they are right now, I actually think I'd have to put Tutu ahead of him. But I do really like Calvin Austin, and I think he's got a future, especially if Russ keeps playing this well. All right, Rashad Bateman. He's having a nice year, man. He really is. I think you put him as just a role-specific good starter. He's kind of a cross between an X and a Z. He lines up inside and out. He's a good starter. Then we got Kendrick Bourne. This is a career wide receiver 4 type through and through. He's on the decline as well. I would put him probably between Tutu and Calvin Austin. Okay, Keyshawn Boutte. These Patriots guys were tough because none of these guys are really high-end options for this tier maker, but you kind of had to include them, a bunch of these dudes, because they're relevant for how they're used in New England right now. He's an intriguing prospect. He's getting playing time, even ahead of a guy like Jalen Polk right now, who is a second-round pick for them. He is the definition of an intriguing prospect. Probably wouldn't be starting for any other team in the league, but he's earned some playing time. A guy with a previous high recruiting pedigree, 5-star recruiting profile, all that stuff. He's piqued some eyeballs, but that's about it. Okay, Tyler Boyd. Unfortunately for Tyler Boyd, I would have to put him down here next to like a Kendrick Bourne. He just has not had juice, even going back to last year in Cincinnati. And frankly, watching the Titans this year, he just hasn't. I mean, has he been playing? Has he not been playing? I frankly don't know. I know he hasn't sat out the whole year, but you just haven't noticed him at all. Definitely on the decline. Not someone you would want to ideally have as one of your 3 starters. A.J. Brown, easy decision. We're not really here to debate the true alphas, just to recognize who those guys are. But, I mean, the with and without stats on A.J. Brown alone for that Eagles offense are self-explanatory. He is an absolute monster. Okay, Dyami Brown. I still like Dyami Brown. I'm going to drop him there for a second while I discuss him. I've been a big Dyami Brown fan over the years. He really literally just drops the ball. That's what it comes down to. Really dynamic after the catch. He's shown that this year. He can stack corners on the outside. He can even track the ball and come down with some tough catches. I still want to believe in Dyami Brown. It's tough. It's really tough. You're kind of losing faith in him at this point, so I think you probably put him down here more next to like a Calvin Austin, if we're being realistic on a guy that I do really like, but we're trying to keep those biases out of this. And he probably belongs down there in terms of a guy that probably shouldn't be starting. Noah Brown, I think he has established himself as a definition of a capable starter. If he's in there as your wide receiver 3, you say, okay, we can live with this and try to get better over time. I like what he's shown for Washington. Okay, then we got Hollywood Brown. Pretty easy one here. I think he could have climbed the ladder a little bit had he been healthy on this Chiefs team. Really a devastating injury, someone I went out to get in one of my dynasty leagues this year. Didn't play out for him this year with the injury. So definitely got to settle him in as a good starter, an obvious vertical threat. I think there's a little bit more in there for him. I thought it was a really good landing spot, but unfortunately haven't seen that yet. Treylon Burks, man, I thought he was going to be a good player, but just something's missing there. He's way down here in terms of, intriguing prospect, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 type even. That has been one of the more devastating moves for any team in the league. Right now, we're looking at A.J. Brown at the top of the list and Treylon Burks at the bottom. They essentially traded A.J. Brown for Treylon Burks. That is a tough pill to swallow for Titans fans. Okay, Jermaine Burton. I mean, he's right there with a guy like Treylon Burks, honestly, a guy that has talent but just hasn't been able to put it together. Serious off-the-field drama, just skipping practice. Not committed to the game, frankly. It loses his spot at Georgia. He transfers to Alabama and all these issues. All the talent in the world, got to talk about him, but until he can show he can get on the field and go to work, you got to just say this guy shouldn't be viewed as a starter in the league. All right, Jamar Chase. I mean, we got a debate here. Like, who would you rather have right now? I still think it's A.J. Brown, as crazy as that sounds, but these guys are just so absurdly good. Trying to order these guys at the top is tough because there are just some absolutely absurd wide receivers in the league right now. Really some of the best talents we've ever seen at the position of all time. And A.J. Brown has been doing this a little bit longer, frankly. Jamar Chase is finally having that year that I think we all knew he was capable of. But if you really look at it, until this year, he hadn't really had the year CeeDee Lamb had last year, or some of the years A.J. Brown has had, where he's got 1,600, 1,700 yards, 14 touchdowns, like offensive player of the year consideration. That's where Jamar Chase is right now. We always knew he was capable of it. Frankly, in years past, I've dropped him like right there and said, go do it. I think he's doing it this year, so definitely needs to be in that top tier. Jalen Coker. I think you can put Jalen Coker in the good prospects category, even if he's an undrafted player. I think all the draft heads agreed this guy should have been drafted. Coming out of Holy Cross, really fun tape, incredible ball skills. And, I mean, he's like the number 1 wide receiver on the Panthers right now as an undrafted player. He's been a big part of Bryce Young's resurgence. He's a good prospect. The Adam Thielen comps have really come accurate on him, and he's sitting there playing next to Adam Thielen in Carolina, which is really fun. But yeah, he's a good prospect, and I think the more he proves, he can settle in, probably somewhere around here. But yeah, we'll drop him in the good prospect category. Keon Coleman. I think he's also in that category. I really am encouraged by what we've seen from him. Dealing with a pretty bad, wrist injury right now. He's had some inconsistent moments. He's still figuring things out, but definitely someone that in time you expect to be, right around here or even up into like a true number 2. Not the most dynamic athlete for a guy that could get way up here, but definitely encouraged by what we've seen. Love some of the back shoulders that he's connected on with Josh Allen. So he's trending up for sure. But to me, not locked in as like a good starter quite yet. Then we got Nico Collins. All right, so Nico, I'm going to put him right there. And this actually bums me out because if he hadn't gotten hurt, and we're recording this at a time where he has yet to come back into the lineup since missing about 5 weeks here this season, if he just continued what he was doing for the first 4 or 5 weeks before the injury, I'm like honestly ready to say this is the type of player Nico Collins is. It might sound crazy, but he just passes the eye test at every single mark. Incredible athlete, size, run after catch, great ball skills. He blocks. Like, what else can you ask of Nico Collins? He has been a huge, honestly, incredibly underrated part of CJ Stroud being one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. And that's not to take away from CJ Stroud's chemistry with Nico Collins, which is another thing you can say about Nico Collins. When those guys get into scramble drill, Collins is one of the best receivers in the league already at being Travis Kelce, basically, and reading the field and being on the same page with his quarterback in scramble drill to find those openings. It's another really underrated aspect of Collins' game. But yeah, I need to see like more of it before I'm here with Nico, but I think he's going to probably end up at the top of this alpha tier. I really think, I mean, top 5 is rich given how many incredible receivers there are in the league, but he just might be the best wide receiver not in that elite category. Brandon Cooks, man, it kind of feels like he's dropped down into this category. He's lost a step. I really think he has. He's having a hard time staying on the field, obviously. I think we've seen the steady decline year after year after year. This is something I've talked about with him, where you look at his yards per route run, his efficiency, it has just been a steady decline. Really nice career, man. I mean, this guy bounced around, former first-round pick, had a bunch of 1,000-yard seasons for a long time, would have been at the top of this group right here, maybe even up to a true number 2. But yeah, unfortunately, I think he's on the decline. Not someone that would be, a one of 3, if you will. Then we got Amari Cooper. Really, really rough year for Amari Cooper, you guys. I'll just drop him there for now while I talk about him. Last year, I mean, he was up here. He really was. Maybe a career year in Cleveland last year with some of the catches he made. But just the way he started this year, he actually, as much as Deshaun Watson was struggling, Amari Cooper was, and I know this sounds crazy, but he was one of the worst wide receivers in the league for the first 5 weeks. A ton of drops. He had a brutal drop where he's wide open on a crossing route, bounces right off his face, gets popped up. I think pick 6 by the other team was a huge difference maker in whatever game that was. Memories escaping me. He's gone to Buffalo. He's been banged up. He caught a touchdown, but he also had another bad drop in that first game. I really like Amari Cooper. I think he has the skill set of an alpha, just as Davante Adams does, but I just don't know if the consistency is there with him, which honestly with Davante, you could say the same thing. Drops and consistency have just been a little bit down on him. So I think you put him there right behind Davante Adams, 2 guys traded into the AFC East this year. I think he has potential to turn this thing around this year. I really do. I think it was just bad vibes in Cleveland, and he's trying to shake that. Hopefully he can get healthy, maybe starting this week against Kansas City. Remind us that he's got this skill set. But, yeah, this hurts me a little bit because I think he was so underrated last year, but it has been a really rough season for Cooper. Okay, Malachi Corley, not a ton to say here other than hold on to the football as you're walking into the end zone, young man. You definitely put him in there with, guys that have talent, but got to figure it out. I'll put him at the bottom. He just really hasn't shown anything yet, but was a prospect I like. He's got a lot of gadget potential, someone that could certainly find himself in like this category someday. Then we got Gabe Davis. Man, Jacksonville gave him a lot of money. In Buffalo, he was this guy, and then he wasn't, and then he wasn't. I honestly think you put him down here, like ahead of like a Brandon Cooks. I mean, maybe even below. Like he's right in this group. It was just not good vibes when they signed him. Didn't seem like a fit. And I mean, I think I would rather have. I think I'm gonna order this a little bit. I'm gonna go Noah Brown, Gabe Davis, then Brandon Cooks. I mean, Cooks just feels like he's trending way down, but I think I would rather have Noah Brown. I think his ball skills are just more reliable than Gabe Davis at this point. Even if Gabe's got a little bit more long speed. Okay, Tank Dell. I think you have a debate with Tank Dell. He's had a little bit more of a quiet season. He's had some more drop issues this year, which were a big problem for him coming out. I think you probably put him ahead of Jordan Addison for now. I definitely think he has true number 2 potential. The way he moves is just different. He might even have 1 of 2 potential. But he hasn't quite captured that this year, and he's had an opportunity to do that, right? They've had wide receiver injuries. Not that he's been horrible or anything, but just hasn't quite lived up to what he accomplished in his rookie season last year. Stephon Diggs, I mean, he's right in here with this group, I think. I think you got to put him probably ahead of these guys. Adams, Diggs, this is tough. I think I'll drop him right there. I think Diggs showed he can still be the best wide receiver on his team when Nico Collins went down, was still really productive. The question is going to become, what does he look like when he bounces back from that injury? There's just no way of knowing that. So it's a tough group to order right there. That's why we got tiers, right? Okay, Greg Dortch. You know what? Let's give Greg Dortch some freaking love, man. He is someone that if he's a part of your starting three, if it's a really good starting three, I think you can live with it. He's kind of a gadget player, but, he's just a good football player, man. If you could put him in the body of some of these elite athletes, you would be talking about, honestly, an alpha wide receiver because he's shown great ball skills, the instincts after the catch, the route running. He's just 5'7" and not that fast, so it's tough. But just a high character football player and a poor physical traits type of guy. But we got to give Greg Dortch some love. He's more than a wide receiver 4, but he's not quite in this category either. So, yeah, we'll put him there. I'll put him at the bottom of that group. Jahan Dotson, what a fall off for this guy. I mean, when Howie Roseman went and traded for him, it was definitely interesting. The Commanders trade him interdivision. I mean, I think you put him down here, right? Like probably behind Calvin Austin, ahead of Keyshawn Boutte. I don't know what happened with Jahan Dotson, man. I thought his rookie season was really promising. He's a guy who was really good ball skills, really good route runner coming out of Penn State. Obviously, the first-round pedigree. But just lost it, man. The ball skills disappeared, and he's in his head, drops and all that. So I don't know if the Eagles can get anything back out of him, but right now it's looking like a good move by the Commanders to kind of just get out of that contract and get a pick for him from a division rival too. Okay, Romeo Doubs. This to me is the definition of a starting Z in the league. I really like what we've seen from Doubs. I think you put him ahead of Bateman, but behind Jordan Addison. I mean, it's still a guy that every time he gets a high leverage target, there's still a little bit of fear in me as a Packers fan that he's going to drop the ball. If he could ever clean that up, you're talking about a guy that could climb up to being a real number 2. But still, I mean, I love that he's a hands catcher. He always attacks the football with his hands, but it does bite him sometimes. So if he can ever clean that up, he's got real movement skills, real route running, real vertical ability, someone that could definitely be a legit number 2 guy. But for now, I'm going to keep him there. Demario Douglas, definition of a good starting slot receiver, in my opinion, the best wide receiver on the Patriots, and someone that is an actual building block for that offense, doing a little bit more as of late. I love that we get Josh Downs right after that. I mean, definition of what you're looking for. He might be the premium example of a good starting slot wide receiver. He was that coming out. He's been that from the second he took the field for the Colts. Love what Josh Downs is doing. And he might even be dynamic enough someday, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, where you are talking about someone that is just so efficient, so productive that you have to say he's a 1 of 2. But for now, I think you put him at the top of this tier. Then you got Mike Evans. Always a tough debate. I'm gonna leave him here for now. We'll discuss this. Always a tough debate with Mike Evans. The Hall of Famer, the 1,000-yard seasons, all that. But if you look at the definition of my 1 of 2 wide receivers, I still think Mike Evans needs a complement with him. He is a dominant perimeter receiver. He can stack, like he can get deep vertically. He can run some routes, but he's not anything after the catch, and he has to play on the outside, and he still has to run a pretty slim route tree. Go balls, digs, comebackers, slants. I don't know. It's always kind of almost an exhausting conversation with Mike Evans because Bucs fans are very loud about him. He's had some great moments throughout his career, and I have reached the point where, yeah, sure, put him in the Hall of Fame. The consistency he's played with, he's a champion. Incredible high character guy, took a discount, frankly, to stay in Tampa Bay. You love all of that. And you watch him play and you say, how can you say that's not an alpha, the way that he big bodies some of these corners? But by definition, I think he is a number 1 of 2, certainly good enough to be the best wide receiver on his team, but he does need that Chris Godwin for this team to be at their best. And Chris Godwin's coming up here. Let's just drag Chris Godwin in here. I mean, these two guys are just the perfect complement as a 1 and 2. It sucks that Chris Godwin got hurt because he was having a career year, and they really do just provide each other's weaknesses. Chris Godwin, the way that he is so dynamic after the catch, they can throw him the ball short. He can create explosives that way. The way he can just burst away from corners on crossing routes. They just literally do what each other can't. Chris Godwin, frankly, has never really established that true verticality. He'll have his flashes, but not like Mike Evans, where you put him on the outside and trust him to win vertically. So to me, these guys are the perfect example of a 1 of 2 being at their best together, kind of the definition of the tier right there. Then we've got Zay Flowers. Man, Zay's been sweet. I honestly think he's been dynamic enough that you might put him in this category. He stopped short of being an alpha because he doesn't quite have the ball skills yet. But I got to put Zay, frankly, above Devontae and Cooper from what we've seen right now. He's a really special player. The route running, the movement skills, the run after catch, the production this year, he is putting up some numbers for an MVP quarterback. And with Diggs getting hurt, I think he even slid him above that. I've just been blown away with Zay Flowers. He has been a really special pick for the Ravens. Then Marv. I mean, this to me feels like the definition of this tier right here. The alpha potential. We know what's in there. We've seen it in about 2 or 3 games. He's had a few moments where he's been a little bit quiet. I think you could argue to put him in the true number 2 category already. It's kind of trivial to debate where he belongs there, but we all agree Marv is heading in the right direction. It's just there's been some of those catches, frankly, this year where he would make those plays at Ohio State and he's not quite making them in the pros. The sideline catches, some of the back shoulder timing throws that he always had at Ohio State. It's just not all there. It's been there. There's been a lot of incredible plays. I mean, what was the game a couple weeks ago? The Dolphins game, maybe, where he made just a couple plays and his body control, the way that he can contort his body and kind of slow down time as he's going down to the ground or trying to secure a catch at the sideline. It's just his game awareness to know like what he has to do to get 2 feet in. It's really, really impressive. You could put him anywhere in this group and I would say, yeah, that makes sense. I think right here is a fine spot for Marvin. But obviously I'm as high as anybody on what he's going to be in the league with our guy Kyler Murray. Then we got T. Higgins. I think T is a 1 of 2. I really do. Health has become a really frustrating recurring theme on him. But when he's healthy, he is kind of the example of the premium number 2 X wide receiver where goes, comebacks, digs. Definition of a 1 of 2, whereas a little bit more of a limited route tree, not really a run after catch threat. But honestly, the skill set between Mike Evans and T. Higgins is pretty similar. Mike Evans has been a little bit more durable than a T. Higgins. So I think that's a good spot for him. Tyreek Hill, honestly, I think you got to put him just based on this year. You slide him below Jamar and A.J. Brown, but I don't think we've necessarily, maybe he's slowing down a little bit. He doesn't quite have the explosives this year as he's had in years past. He's 30 years old now. That's going to fall off at some point, but Miami's just been kind of a mess for the majority of this season. I'm not ready to put that on him, but it is enough that I'll put him below AJ and Jamar. DeAndre Hopkins. I think Hopkins at this point you say is a true number 2, and I'm going to put him ahead of Keenan Allen. Obviously, in Tennessee, it just hasn't been a very lucrative situation in terms of production and financials for him. But I don't think he's dynamic enough as a separator to put him up into the 1 of 2 category. And you could even argue he belongs as like just a good starting X. But I'm comfortable enough saying he is a number 2. Ideally, you'd have a Rashee Rice or someone else to complement him healthy there. But I don't think we're going to get too many disagreements with Hopkins in there. Jawan Jennings. I love Jawan Jennings. I actually am comfortable putting him in this kind of slot playmaker category. He's kind of its own build, a very unique archetype in the league. But, this is a guy that I make a lot of pro comps on, a Juwan Jennings, someone like, Jordan Whittington down here. I compared to Juwan Jennings, but a very specific role, but just a dominant player in that role. A big slot, one of the best run blocking wide receivers in the league. They flex him inside as kind of a wing tight end at times, frankly. But the way he can produce after the catch, being an underneath target, awesome contested catch guy. He's actually a pretty good route runner. He's just a limited athlete. So not someone you want to stick on the outside. But he gets lost in the sauce a little bit with how many playmakers they have in San Fran. But he has earned this, and there was that game, I think it was the Rams game. He had one of the games of the year for wide receiver where he was like mossing guys down the field. He had like 180 yards, like 3 touchdowns, something like that. There's a real player there in Juwan Jennings, just underrated being in San Fran. Then we got Jerry Jeudy. I honestly think he's more in this category. You can very much compare him to someone like Jordan Addison, Romeo Doubs. I think he got a little bit too much money. I think his draft pedigree being, the guy he was coming out of Alabama, one of the best route running prospects in a long, long time. And he still is one of the better route runners in the league. But you look at the production, you look at the lack of ball skills, the small frame, not incredible after the catch. He's pretty good after the catch, but honestly, his draft pedigree and the contract he got in Cleveland is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I mean, tell me the difference between Jerry Jeudy and Romeo Doubs, frankly. They're very, very similar caliber players at this stage in their career. Justin Jefferson, I mean, do we even need to analyze it? He's creme de la creme right now. I mean, let's move on. Frankly, he's absurd. Deontay Johnson, I would put him right next to Jerry Jeudy and frankly ahead of Jerry Jeudy. Hasn't been a good fit in Baltimore so far. He's already kind of complaining about his targets. I actually thought he was pretty damn good in Carolina. I was a little surprised that they moved on from him. Obviously, they figured we're not going to pay him. But it was a good fit. I mean, he was getting his targets. He was producing, reminded us of the route running, and a guy that does have frustrating drops, but actually, I would say makes more sensational catches than someone like Jerry Jeudy. So that feels right for me. Quentin Johnston. Okay. Where do we put Quentin? Probably still in here if we're being realistic about it, but he has really been solid this year. Some of his production has felt a little on the fluky side. Some busted coverages have led to some big play opportunities for him, and he's capitalized on them. Hasn't really had the drop issues. He's somewhere in this cluster, I think. You could even argue like there is still theoretical alpha potential in there for Quentin. I'm not ready to go there. I think this feels right. I like Quentin. He was my number 1 wide receiver in that draft, but you can't just forget about what happened in that rookie season. This is a position where most of these guys do hit the ground running as rookies, so I think we leave him there, but acknowledge that he's playing well and trending up, and we'll kind of see where it goes. He'll be an interesting player to evaluate next year when we do this exercise again. Jameson Williams, I mean, he's exactly this. The off-field stuff continues to frustrate me. He had the gambling suspension. This year he got in some sort of, he got pulled over and, had some just off-field stuff. We don't need to get into it, but it's clearly held him back. I don't think that's controversial to say. Obviously a great vertical threat when he's on the field, though, and that's kind of what the definition of this tier is there for. Khalif Raymond, I think you put in this category. Really nice role player. He's done everything they ask of him in that kind of slot gadget player role. He's been a vertical threat for them as well. I do want to remind you guys, these guys aren't necessarily like, this isn't to say Khalif Raymond is better than Jameson Williams. It's just these have to be ordered some way on this graphic, right? Like you could really do this anyway. It's just, got to be done somehow. Christian Kirk, A year ago, I would have said he's a true number 2. He's a really efficient slot guy, but I think at this point you got to put him down, frankly, even below like Josh Downs in that division. I like Christian Kirk, but it's been a couple of years now where he just hasn't quite lived up to that first year in Jacksonville where he was super, super efficient, was kind of a poor man's Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now he's more just, he's a good starting slot wide receiver. Okay, Cooper Kupp, he's a 1 of 2 by definition. I mean, outstanding skill set. I'll drop him there for a second. We'll place him in the right spot in a moment. But, I mean, run after catch, run blocking, contested catches, chemistry with Stafford. In his prime, you would have said he's more of an alpha, similar to an Amon-Ra St. Brown, where, he's kind of a slot type, not necessarily the most athletic guy in the field, but he was just so productive, so dominant that he was an alpha by nature. But at this stage in his career, he's more of a 1 of 2, still a really good player. I think I'd put him between Adams and Diggs at this stage. Still produced in a way that Cooper and Adams haven't shown to do this year, but does need either that running mate, a guy like Puka next to him, or you go back to he had a Brandon Cooks was a true number 2 to complement him back in the day. But then CeeDee Lamb, kind of a frustrating year for CeeDee, right? You're almost kind of saying, kind of Brandon Ayuki. But I do think he earned this last year, and I'm not going to take that away from him quite yet. But, kind of pressure's on him next year with Dak and kind of change of internal scenery, if you will. Pressure's going to be on both Tyreek and CeeDee Lamb, I think, as we visit this exercise next year to maintain this absolute top tier. But with what CD did last year, I mean, truly one of the top wide receiver seasons ever, he absolutely earned the elite alpha. Oh my God, how long has this been there? That's really annoying. How did I not notice that? Allen Lazard. I have had some fun with Allen Lazard, and not so much fun at times as a Packers fan. Very, very frustrating player at times, especially this year where he's actually had some of his best games of his career early in the Jets season, but also those frustrating moments. He's injured currently, but he led the league in drops at the point of his injury, but also had some really good games. For me, I don't know why I put him in the prospects category. He's down here with the Noah Browns, Gabe Davises. I think I'd put him below Gabe Davis. He does some stuff well. He's a good run blocker, and this year he's shown some run after catch. He's got the chemistry with Rodgers, but I have obviously for a long time said you don't want Allen Lazard as one of your 3 starters, and I think that has aged very well over the years, especially last year as the Jets had paid him. But this year he's done some good stuff. In years past I might have put him somewhere down here. I'll give him some credit for what he's done this year and bump him up to, he's a capable wide receiver 3 type. Xavier Legette, I mean, just from I know Coker's kind of outproduced him, but Legette to me has shown some really nice stuff. He's right there with Coleman where there's been some drops, but 2 guys that were drafted, I think back-to-back or damn near back-to-back, if not right next to each other, but really nice players. I think Legette is gonna be somewhere, up to a true number 2, maybe even to be a Mike Evans, T. Higgins type, where he's just a really good perimeter wide receiver. But for now, I think there's just a lot of consistency that needs to be established there. Young player on the ups. Then Tyler Lockett. I'll still give Tyler some love as a true number 2. Definitely trending down more to be, in this kind of category or more in the slot group. Just as we said about Keenan Allen. But Tyler Lockett has been a true number 2 throughout his career. Just out of respect for what he's done, I will leave him there. But it's definitely, he's getting up there in age. There's no other way around it. Drake London, I'm going to drop him right there behind Mike Evans, I think. I think that's a good spot for him. He's kind of the definition of a 1 of 2, where what he does, he is absurd at it. The contested catch ability, running routes in the short to intermediate game, is actually really underrated in that ability. And just the basketball background is so evident on Drake London. I love the way he runs digs and boxes out safeties coming down to crack him over the middle. This tier kind of exists for the Drake London types. It's funny to see him next to Mike Evans because he got a lot of Mike Evans comps coming out. They're actually very different players. Evans is more put him on the outside, work the sidelines, and can run some digs and comebackers. Drake London, it's like, man, over the middle of the field and kind of catching the ball underneath, doing stuff after the catch. That's where he's at his absolute best. Luke McCaffrey. I am not the biggest Luke McCaffrey guy. I know Commanders fans really like him. I mean, how could you not? They spent a third-round pick on him. He's Christian's brother, all that. I understand getting excited about McCaffrey, but I really did think he was overdrafted. I saw him as a clear day 3 project type, someone that to me still feels like a quarterback who has converted to wide receiver and is learning how to play the position. I think in time he could be something like a Jawan Jennings, kind of that big slot, really good run blocker, a cerebral player that does some stuff well. But we have not seen the run after catch ability of a Jawan Jennings in Luke McCaffrey. The ball skills have been really frustrating with Luke McCaffrey at times. And I think other than sitting down in zones and having some of that former quarterback in him, really the best play he's had this year was a reactionary play and scramble drill with Jaden Daniels where he worked with him to get open. You see some of the IQ, like he's a smart dude, but I think he's just got a long way to go. And I don't see a dynamic athlete there in Luke McCaffrey either. He ran like a 4.48 40. I in college thought he ran a lot slower than that and have yet to see too much more game speed in the NFL as well. So I'll put him ahead of Corley and Burton and I guess Burks. I mean, I'd still probably rather have Treylon Burks on my team. But yeah, it's just honestly where I'm at with Luke McCaffrey. I got nothing against him. But just being honest. All right, Lad freaking McConkey. God, I love Lad. Where do we put Lad? He's kind of a unique player. I'm going to put him here for a second. I mean, I really think this is where he's destined. I think he's so much more than the stereotype slot wide receiver. So it almost pains me to put him in here because he actually, I think, can step outside. The comp I've always had on him is Keenan Allen, which is why I think, lumping him up there next to Keenan feels right with Lad trending up, Keenan trending down. But just for these young players, I do just want to see a little bit more before we get up into this category. So for me, I'm going to actually label him as more of a Z/slot, kind of like a Deontay Johnson, Jordan Addison type, Tank Dell. I think I'd rather have Lad than Jordan Addison at this point. Just the off-field difference is I just don't trust Jordan Addison to continue to get too much better. I just don't like what I've seen from him off the field. I think Lad is really heading up. So we're gonna drop Lad right there as one of the exciting ascending young players. Don't necessarily think he has alpha potential just because of the size. But yeah, love me some Lad. Can't really go high enough on Lad. All right, Terry McLaurin. This is an alpha, and it's been so fun to see that be proven all these years when I've been doing this. I've been like, guys, just wait till he gets a quarterback. He's going to show you that he is a top 10 receiver in the league. He's a legitimate alpha, can threaten all 3 levels, awesome vertical threat, underrated run after catch ability, makes some of the most stupid good catches you'll see all season long. We're going to talk about George Pickens in a little bit. The only other guy, I mean, Justin Jefferson as well, but like if you talk about like spectacular catch Madden rating. Like, can this guy make just stupid catches with toe taps on the sideline, body control that you've never seen before? Maybe Marvin Harrison's in that convo too. But Terry McLaurin's always done that. The way he can track the ball over the shoulder. So, like, he really is a do-it-all alpha. It's been fun to see him kind of get that production this year. Then we got Jalen McMillan. To me, he belongs down here for now. I like some of the stuff we've seen. I think I'd put him ahead of Burton and Burks and ahead of McCaffrey, ahead of Booty, probably ahead of Dotson. I think I'll stop there with Jalen McMillan. He's interesting. I think you've seen a lot of juice from him. Really projects as a good Chris Godwin long-term replacement. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Godwin coming off the injury, because McMillan lining up in the slot, catching a slant, breaking tackles, running away from slot corners to create some vertical separation from the slot. There really is a lot of that Chris Godwin skill set in there, so it was a natural fit when they took him. But obviously a little bit of a crowded room, and he's dealt with some injuries once that opportunity opened up with the Chris Godwin injury. So still needs to kind of prove what he's made of. But I like what we've seen. DK Metcalf, I mean, I talked about this out the gate. He is the perfect example of a 1 of 2. Now, I think I'm actually going to put him behind Drake London, ahead of Chris Godwin. Man, this actually gets kind of tough. Because I think you'd rather at this point have Zay than DK Metcalf, and then Chris Godwin's coming off the injury, so it's a tough group to sort, but I don't know. DK is just so different than everybody else in the league. I think I'll put him. I'll put him here. His explosiveness is just something you can't really replicate with his size. But the thing is, he's actually kind of not the run after catch threat that you would think he is at his size. He can put on a stiff arm, and obviously when he catches those deep balls, he's a speed threat after the catch. But you would think he'd be a little bit harder to get down after the catch than he is. And some of the ball skills frustrations with him have held him back from basically becoming A.J. Brown, his college teammate. I mean, A.J. Brown over the years has really learned how to be a trustworthy, contested catch guy down the field. DK Metcalf, frankly, has incredibly low efficiency on contested catches. He gets a lot of opportunities because look at him. Why wouldn't you throw him the ball down the sideline? But he's like a 30% contested catch guy over the last 2 years. Like, that is really frustrating for DK Metcalf, and I don't think it's discussed enough how often he frankly lets Geno down, because these are high leverage moments in big games. And he's putting it up for DK Metcalf, and he's not using his frame, which is the biggest of any wide receiver in the league, and he's not using it to dominate these cornerbacks. So it's like, man, there's something missing with him, but it's not all missing. I mean, he is a dynamic, special player. John Mechie, unfortunately, I got to put him down kind of with the Jalen McMillan, Jahan Dotson category. I'm going to put him ahead of Dotson. Man, that's tough. I'll put Mechie ahead of Dotson. I've always believed in Mechie. I've been disappointed that his opportunity never really came because they've just flooded that group with weapons all of a sudden, and he had, obviously, the cancer kept him out for his rookie season. So he's an easy player to root for. But with, Diggs and Collins going down, there's been some small opportunities there, and he hasn't fully stepped up. Had a nice touchdown catch against the Lions in his last game, so that was good to see. But I don't think he's quite established himself as like a capable starter. I think he's more of a wide receiver 4, an intriguing prospect at this stage. And I hope that changes in the future. Jacoby Myers, definition of a good slot wide receiver. Don't need to say too much more on him. I think I'd put him behind. He's done some good stuff this year when healthy. I'll give him the benefit. It's tough. I mean, Kirk had that really good 2022 season. I feel like you could still capture that. So, Myers is playing better than Kirk right now, but hasn't shown the upside of a Kirk. So do with that as you will. Adonai Mitchell, unfortunately for Mitchell, I got to put him down into the intriguing prospects category. I'll put him at the top of it because in his last game, he finally emerged. He doubled his stats on the season in his last game, which was against the Bills. But yeah, he's just had some really frustrating moments. A lot of just not converting on the sideline, not getting the second foot in, not being able to secure the catch. He had a frustrating fumble last week against the Bills, but finally, last week, showing some of the route running, the ability to be a legitimate starter in this league. So you're hoping he's trending in the right direction, but I haven't seen enough to put him up there with these guys quite yet, frankly. Darnell Mooney, I really like what we've seen from Mooney this year, and my pro comp on him has always been Brandon Cooks. And I've said for a long time, This dude's super underrated because there's no worse job in the NFL than being Justin Fields' number 2 wide receiver. There just isn't. He just is not going to look at you. And that's what happened. And the Falcons watched the tape where you're like, I mean, this guy gets open. He had some, drops and lack of contested catches in that final year because he just was kind of checked out at that point. But I think if you're saying this is a Brandon Cooks comp in his prime, that's a true number 2 wide receiver. And I think he's been that for Atlanta. Has he fully earned it? That's tough. Like, he's either this really good vertical threat or kind of a really good Z, like kind of at the top of this list. But I think if you go back, I mean, before DJ Moore got to Chicago and he became a guy that just wasn't getting those targets, I mean, this is kind of where I was at with Mooney. He's a tough guy to rank. I think what I'm going to do is put him right here. But if he finishes the season strong, you would put him kind of like right here even. But we'll put him down here. DJ Moore, right up after that. I do think he's an alpha. I do. Frustrating season though. Very, very frustrating season. But the thing is, like, dominant season last year, and I still look at the skill set, and by definition, he is an alpha. Great route runner, great hands, run after catch threat, vertical threat, like incredible athlete. I just don't know what's going on this year in Chicago for all these guys. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it's been a frustrating season to the point that, like, if he keeps struggling, you're talking about a guy that maybe he is just a number 2. But last year he was a clear alpha. And based on what he did last year, you'd probably put him ahead of Terry, but I can't do that right now. Elijah Moore, I think he's a career wide receiver 3 type. I'm going to put him ahead of Greg Dortch. Just hasn't been able to take a step up over the years. I know he's been in Cleveland, which hasn't helped. Still a really good route runner, but the consistency just has not been there for him. Okay, Malik Neighbors, I'll put him right next to Marv. I mean, this is a pretty special tier, obviously, for some pretty special players that have potential to genuinely get up into this category. But I'm going to put him, as we had him coming into the year, right behind Marv. I thought these two guys were 2 of the best wide receiver prospects I've ever evaluated. In fact, they were the 2 highest grades I've ever had on wide receivers. Jamar Chase was the other guy, but he had missed that. He opted out of that final season, which dinged him down. It didn't ding him down, but it didn't quite give him that opportunity to get the high marks I gave on Neighbors and Harrison. So really, really special players who I expect someday to be, at least into this alpha tier, if not the elite alpha tier. Puka Nacua, he is a 1 of 2, and I'm going to put him just a spot above Cooper Kupp. But these two guys, very similar to the Godwin-Evans situation where, I mean, not true number 1, like not true alphas in terms of absolute do-it-all guys. You could go down the board and find some missing skill sets with these guys. In the case of Puka Nacua, drops the ball a lot, and not really the most prolific route runner. He gets open on the routes that they ask him to run. But yeah, unique skill sets, but dominant at what they do. I love Puka Nacua. I think he's very similar, actually, to Deebo Samuel, which I don't necessarily hear that comp a ton, but just dominant run after catch threat. Does win tough catches, but does have drops on top of that, and not the most unbelievable route runner. And with that, let's just grab Deebo and throw him in this group. And I'm going to put him a little bit higher just because he's such a special player after the catch. And I'm just debating how high I want to go with Deebo. I think I'm going to put Deebo behind Drake London and Evans, but ahead of DK Metcalf. But yeah, there is not a better run after catch threat in the league than Deebo Samuel. There's just not. I mean, his ability to consistently make the first man miss. If you look at like missed tackle force percentage over the last 5 years, he blows away the competition. And he can get down the field. He can make plays as a wide receiver, but he is by nature a unique skill set. He can theoretically be the best wide receiver on the team, but does need complementary options next to him that can do some of the stuff he lacks in terms of being a vertical threat, being a more consistent possession wide receiver. But yeah, that tier exists for the Debo types. Rome Odunze. So I'm going to put Rome, frankly, here. I think if it was a more lucrative situation, a more opportune situation, we would have him right around here. But frankly, it just hasn't been there. And even when they've gone his way, it hasn't always been there. There's been some kind of awareness, miscommunications, and a lot of the balls that he would come down with in college, some of those really high-end contested catch looks, just haven't been there for him. The toe-tapping stuff on the sideline, like some of these looks that you watch his college tape, you would expect him to make in the pros. He hasn't done that quite yet. I fully expect him to get there in time, but just like Coleman and Leggett, he's just not there yet. He should be starting. He's a capable starter. He's got upside. But he is not where Neighbors and Harrison are. I said that on him as a prospect. I always thought it was silly that these guys were all lumped together. Like, no. Odunze is out here. Still a good pick for the Bears. First-round caliber player. But never should have been in the convo with these two guys. He's just not the prolific player that those two are. He's much more in this category. And that's shown this year, but I do think he'll get there if the Bears can just get their act together. Chris Olave, I'm going to put him here for now while we talk about him. He is an interesting conversation. A lot going on with him because on one hand, I think he's proved to be more dynamic even than I thought he was coming out. I thought this was kind of his ceiling as a prospect because I just didn't see the overall ball skills from him at Ohio State and the frame to be more of a highly prolific type of player like we have up in this category. But I think we've seen some really incredible catches from him and some toughness making plays over the middle of the field too, where I'm actually comfortable with him in this category, kind of next to a T. Higgins. But at the same time, he's just had his fourth concussion, man. And that's, it does call back a little bit to what I said coming out, where I'm worried about the frame, and that has hurt him. Like, he can't quite hold up getting those targets over time, I think. So it is tough. I am going to respect his game for what he's done on the field, and he really looked premium. I'll just use the word premium in his games this year. But the durability is becoming a raising concern, which frankly you can say that about T. Higgins as well. So I'm going to put him, next to T. You could argue these two one way or the other. I'll put him above. I mean, gosh, coin toss, frankly. I really like both these players. This is tough. I'll put him above T. But got to stay healthy, man. Joshua Palmer, I mean, this is the archetype right there. Capable wide receiver 3. He's fine. Long term, you'd want a little bit more, and I think the Chargers do. But he can run routes, come down with the ball. He's fine. Tim Patrick, likewise, career wide receiver 3 type, kind of with Noah Brown. These are good players. Put him in there. Big body possession wide receivers. He's done a really good job for what he is for Detroit. Really nice pickup. Kind of that last missing piece that they needed to complement the other pieces they have there. But nothing more than that. Ricky Pearsall, got to put him in this category. I really like what we've seen from him. Frankly, you maybe even put him ahead of Leggett. He's obviously in a better situation than Leggett. I had Pearsall ahead of Leggett coming out. Have I really seen anything to truly... And I liked Leggett. I liked both these guys a lot. I thought they were both good picks where they went as late first-round picks. But I don't know that I've necessarily seen anything to change my opinion on those guys in a good way. Like, these guys have been who I thought they were. I think they're ascending good starters into the future. Big fan of Pearsall. I think that's a good spot for him. George Pickens. I think George is at the top of the 1 of 2 tier. I'll put him there for now. I think he honestly could keep climbing. he's very close to the alpha. I might actually put him at the top of the 1 of 2 tier. He is not the most unbelievable route runner. He's not. He doesn't create a crazy amount of separation, which if you're going to be an alpha, separation is a key aspect of that, right? It's at the top of the tier description. Creates, can threaten all 3 levels. That includes separating at all 3 levels. He wins at all 3 levels, doesn't necessarily separate at all 3 levels consistently, but I do think his route running and his release is getting better, so he could get there. One thing that George Pickens has really surprised me in is he has a much better run after catch threat than I ever thought he would be coming out, and that's a key distinction between him and Mike Evans are pretty similar players. I think Evans separates a little bit better, but Pickens is so much more dynamic after the catch. And I think Pickens Evans actually has some drops from time to time. Pickens has been pretty good with that. So I would say, with how he's playing with Russ, he is trending towards getting this spot as an alpha. I really like Pickens, but I'm gonna have to pump the brakes a little bit and drop him at the top of that tier. Okay, Alec Pierce. I'm actually ready to put him here. I think with the role that he plays, he's inconsistent, but so is Hollywood Brown and Jamison Williams. But with the role he plays, he is very MVS-y for the Colts. MVS not on this list, by the way, but you could probably argue MVS in here. I kind of forgot about MVS, frankly, but you guys can use your imagination. I actually like Alec Pierce a lot. I'm a little proud to say that I kind of pumped the brakes a little bit on, Adonai Mitchell just for sure taking Alec Pierce's job. I said, I thought Pierce actually showed a lot of separation on tape last year. They just couldn't find him with Gardner Minshew out there. And, with Flacco and Richardson, stronger armed quarterbacks, they've been able to utilize that vertical ability that Pierce has. So I don't think you just give up. I mean, you certainly don't give up on him. He's been a very productive player for them. I like Alec Pierce, and he's definitely been better than Mitchell this year. And then another Colts wide receiver, Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman, to me, is the absolute definition of a true number 2. I don't think he is prolific enough. He got fed that one year. He had really good production. But to me, he is not prolific enough to say with any confidence that you are happy if he is the best wide receiver on your team, if you surround him with the right skill sets. I think you could always do a little bit better if he's your number 1. And that's kind of where this cutoff is. And, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Really good big-bodied guy, makes good plays down the field, underrated after the catch, but he just hasn't, to me, taken that next leap forward, and I don't know that he really will. Jalen Polk, really disappointing season for Jalen Polk. Another guy that has been a bit of a draft win for me, saying he was overdrafted by the Patriots. Not that he can't get there, but was a guy that always reminded me of Dontavion Wicks, where he's a good player, but had some inconsistent moments and just not much of a separator. Physical wide receiver type, but just not worth the 34th pick in the draft. And he has been, frankly, passed up by Keyshawn Boutte on the depth chart, which is kind of embarrassing for Jalen Polk. But honestly, he's been even worse than Luke McCaffrey even. I would still rather have Polk. I still think Polk in time will pass up Boutte and probably Jahan Dotson. I think I'd rather have Mechie, though. I mean, is that crazy? Mechie was a second-round pick as well. I don't know, man. It's just been really frustrating. He's had drops, just completely benched at this point. I think you're really discouraged by what you're getting from Polk out of that Patriots draft. Jaden Reed. He, to me, belongs... I think he's actually ascended to the true number 2 category. And it's actually fun to put him right next to Tyler Lockett. I think I would actually put him ahead of Tyler Lockett and, frankly, ahead of Keenan Allen at this point. But this was my pro comp on Jaden Reed coming out, was Tyler Lockett, in a guy that some people called a reach when the Packers took him. I thought I had a second-round grade on him. I thought he was a really dynamic player at Michigan State, a much better vertical threat than he got credit for. Which has always been the Tyler Lockett thing, right? You look at his build and his skill set, you say, it's a slot wide receiver. Well, actually, he's got really good ball tracking, really good deep vertical skills. And year 1, you didn't necessarily see the vertical stuff with Reed. This year, it's coming on. So it's fun to see him kind of up there next to Tyler Lockett. Really, really dynamic player after the catch as well. I think this is a really good definition for what Jaden Reed has become for Green Bay. Josh Reynolds, right next to Tim Patrick. It's kind of funny. These guys have flipped spots. They're like the same damn player. I actually think Tim Patrick's a little bit better. I think Detroit got the better player in that deal. Denver moved on from Tim Patrick because of the injury concerns. Ironically, Josh Reynolds has been the one injured this year. Funny how that stuff works out sometimes, but basically the same player. Rashee Rice, I think him and Jaden Reed, actually, same draft class, very similar. I mean, Rice, he's climbing. He's very similar to Deebo Samuel in skill set, in usage, where not always the most consistent ball skills. He's getting there. Not the best route runner or separator or anything like that, but just a really nasty player after the catch. I don't know if I'm quite there yet. It was definitely trending towards him getting up there into this group before the injury. But I think right next to Jaden Reed, next to DeAndre Hopkins, it's a good spot for him. But definitely of note that he has the Deebo skill set. It's just a matter of establishing that a little bit more over time. Calvin Ridley, absolute definition of a true number 2. I think I would put him just ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, this tier exists for Calvin Ridley, a really talented route runner, a guy that can make some really nice catches from time to time, more consistent than a Johnson or Jerry Jeudy, but hasn't been able to take that step to the point where you've ever been able to say, if he's the best wide receiver on your team, you're happy with it. Atlanta thought when they traded away Julio Jones, they were going to get that guy, and it just was never the case. And I think in Tennessee, he's a good player, but I think you still want more from that. So again, the reason the true number 2 tier exists is for a guy like Calvin Ridley. Demarcus Robinson, I'm going to put him next to Lazard and Dortch as these kind of underrated wide receiver 3 types. I'd even put him, honestly, ahead of Elijah Moore. He's a clutch player. I'll say that about him. He has some really good moments throughout his career, and he's been a godsend for the Rams as they've dealt with some injuries there. Just a very stable wide receiver 3 type. Wan'Dale Robinson, I will put in the playmaker category. He's the least efficient wide receiver in the league because he gets a bazillion targets. In fact, I actually think Khalif Raymond is a more efficient, better overall player. A little bit more dynamic after the catch, a little bit more vertical speed, but Wan'Dale's a nice starting caliber slot wide receiver. Rashid Shaheed, definition of a capable vertical threat. I think you actually even put him ahead of Jamison Williams, as crazy as that sounds. But I think has just shown a little bit more and frankly, like better real vertical skills. Jameson, honestly, a lot of his explosive plays have come on those like deep posts and deep crossers. Rashid Shaheed, I actually trust a little bit more to stack a corner, track a deep ball, win a tough catch down the sideline. Pretty damn similar players, similar builds. I just wish Rashid Shaheed would get a real wide receiver number. Khalil Shakir, honestly, I think Shakir, Jaden Reed, like Rashee Rice, like these are guys that, and I know like Downs is pushing that as well, so it's kind of a tough line because Shakir is a true slot guy. I don't think Shakir is quite as dynamic and explosive as like Jaden Reed and Rashee Rice, so I think I will knock him down. But he's right there with Josh Downs in terms of like, in the conversation for the best true slot wide receiver, not named Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's just different. But it's kind of a similar skill set there. Just physical, consistent slot wide receiver. I think you could make a case that he's getting up there, but we should probably leave him there for now. Bills fans might not like that, but I feel pretty solid about that. Darius Slayton, he's a good vertical threat. I would put him probably right there between Pierce and Jamison Williams. Don't need to say too much more about him. Devontae Smith, he's a really tough conversation. I'm gonna leave him there for now. As we talk about him, he's just a tough combo because he's never had to show that he can be the best wide receiver on his team. Like he's really only had to show that he's that. But he's so different in the sense of like, Jesus, this guy is so good. And you kind of just know in your heart of hearts that he's an alpha. Like you pick him out of Philadelphia and you put him anywhere else where they need a number 1 wide receiver, you kind of just know he's going to be that guy because he does everything. He threatens to all three levels. He's a ridiculous route runner. He defies the law of physics when it comes to run after catch and contested catch ability. So to me, by definition, I actually think even in a wide receiver 2 role, and he hasn't shown that necessarily he is a number 1 because how could you? The AJ Brown is freaking there. But I actually think he's there, man. He is special. And maybe that catch he made, one of the catches of the year a couple weeks ago, somehow getting his feet down. I can't remember quite what team they were playing there. Maybe that was what set him over the edge. But it's just absurd what Jalen Hurts has to work with. It's just unfair. Jackson Smith and Jigba. We did this 2 weeks ago. I would have been putting him down here, in the good prospects category. But what he did in his last start, coming off the bye week, he absolutely needs to be in this group. I think I'll put him ahead of Demario Douglas. Finally showing all right, there's JSN. And I do think he has potential to be a true number 2 because he's a guy that theoretically, and what he showed in that last start, which was against the Rams, is you can target him vertically. You can throw slot fades to him, throw deep corner routes, and he has the ball tracking and ball skills to come down with that. It just hasn't been there really other than that game. So I'm glad we're doing this now that he's had a game where he's shown the potential that he had coming out of Ohio State. But for a long time, drops, awareness issues, a lack of explosiveness, frankly. Going into that game, he was 73rd in the league in yards per route run, despite being 8th in targets. That's wildly inefficient, but that is obviously changed after really breaking through. So finally starting to show why he was a first-round pick, why people were so excited about him coming out. And, of course, just as things work, as soon as I start kind of victory lapping on having Zay Flowers ahead of him in my draft rankings and kind of pumping the brakes on Jackson Smith and Jigba, as soon as I start victory lapping on him on Twitter, boom, it happens. But I'm happy that happened because he's a really fun player, and the Seahawks are eventually going to need, that compliment to DK Metcalf because Tyler Lockett's not going to be able to be that guy forever. So it's good timing for that to show up. Cortland Sutton, to me, right there with Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think Sutton can be the best wide receiver on your team at this point, but really good player. I've always been a fan of Cortland Sutton. Just a good number 2 X on the outside. Adam Thielen. I still think Adam Thielen deserves to be probably in the Z category. And Bateman's done some nice stuff this year, but I still would put Thielen above that. But yeah, he can line up inside and out, super reliable. Not the most explosive player, but still a good route runner. He's been hurt this year, but he was actually really good for Carolina last year. And I hope he can get back out there for Bryce, who's playing better lately. Brian Thomas Jr. Man, we had Brian Thomas as wide receiver 4 below Rome. I honestly, this might be a hot take. He's easily in this category, right? He is one of the best vertical threats in the league already. His ability to get deep, track the deep ball, it's real. But he also just moves differently than a 6'3", 210-pound wide receiver is supposed to be able to move. I think he's a really good route runner, underratedly so. He's really good after the catch. He has theoretical alpha potential. A Terry McLaurin is not a bad projection for a Brian Thomas. I actually am going to put him here. It's kind of like a split, clearly. And you could do that with a lot of these tiers, splits within tiers, if you will. But I actually think he is one of the really, really promising young wide receivers in this league. And if the Jags can get their act together and these guys can all stay healthy together, Lawrence, Brian Thomas, I do think he has the quarterback that can help him ascend to that level. Cedric Tillman, he's either here or he is here. Probably, if we're being realistic, you'd put him right there. I would put him ahead of Cedric Tillman. Ahead of Quentin Johnston. But I mean, I have made comps to Nico Collins in terms of skill set on Cedric Tillman. There is a world, maybe a 5% chance world, just as you would maybe say about Quentin Johnston, where you could say he actually has like real alpha number one wide receiver potential. You are probably getting ahead of yourself with that type of talk, but the skill set comp with Nico Collins is very, very similar. A couple of third round picks coming out, but I think this is the right spot right in this group. He's a really promising player. Just needs to prove a little bit more. Jalen Tolbert, I don't know. He's all right. He's a wide receiver 4 type, in my opinion. Decent player. You know, if he was a little bit more proven, you'd maybe throw him in here with like Demarcus Robinson. But I think he kind of is what he is. He is what he was coming out of college, too. He's just been a solid kind of perimeter option. I'll put him in there with like Tyler Boyd, Kendrick Bourne, Diami Brown, that kind of type. Trey Tucker. I like Trey Tucker. I don't think he's proven to be anything more than an intriguing prospect quite yet. I think I would put him behind Tutu Atwell. But he's got some speed. He's shown some good stuff for the Raiders. He has a chance to emerge as, you know, like something like there. But I don't think he's proven that quite yet. I'm going to put him right there. Devon Vele, similar tier there. I think he, 7th round pick for Denver, by the way, rookie. He's doing some really good stuff. He's played that kind of big slot role in Sean Payton's offense. He's always had that on his team. And I like what I've seen. I think you probably put him with like Jalen McMillan, John Mechie, that type. Probably behind Jalen Polk because of the draft pedigree. But heading in the right direction. Worth noting. Jalen Waddle. This kind of feels right for Jalen Waddle at this point, right? Like I at this point, I'm kind of done believing, and I know he's had Tyreek Hill there, so it's kind of similar to what we said with Devontae Smith, where how could he prove that he's a number one? But the ball skills for Jalen Waddle are not there. He is a hyper athlete. If he's your number 2 wide receiver, you're absolutely freaking thrilled with that. But can we honestly say that he's established that he can be the best wide receiver on your team? I don't think he has. I'd rather have him than any of these guys. But some of the drops this year, the lack of contested catchability, I think he's a true number 2 at this point. Christian Watson, he's right here. And I think I'd put Hollywood ahead of him. Yeah, I mean, tough spot for Watson because he shares all these targets. We've already talked about Reed and Dobbs, and we haven't done Wicks yet. But, I mean, he's an efficient as hell wide receiver. He's a really good vertical threat, very streaky player. He goes on like 4-week stretches where he looks like freaking Terry McLaurin sometimes. And then he'll go back to, you know, looking like Darius Slayton where he's got frustrating drops and inconsistencies. So, you know who he is, but kind of tough to know what he is on a week-to-week basis, if you will. Nick Westbrook-Akine, he's very Jawan Jennings-y, but I don't think he's quite as efficient in terms of the run after catch and the contested catchability. I'd probably put him more in the wide receiver 3 types next to like Demarcus Robinson, like right there. Jordan Whittington. I know that he has, like, the pro comp on Whittington was Jawan Jennings, and he is really good after the catch, really useful player. Still an interesting prospect, very much unproven. I think I'm going to put him actually ahead of Jalen McMillan. I just think he's heading towards especially being on that Rams team, I think he's in a really good fit because they have a role for that player. Eventually, Cooper Kupp is not going to be there. And Whittington is going to be able to step into that role and be a really nice player. Like, if I had to bet who ends up having the better career between McMillan and even like Calvin Austin, Diami Brown, Jalen Tolbert, we keep climbing up the list with kind of the younger players here, I would certainly bet on it. Now, I don't think he's quite established to be better than those guys yet, so I'll drop him back down. But definitely a guy that you guys should have on your radar as someone that could be a really nice starter, kind of settle in where Jawan Jennings is. Into the future. Dontavion Wicks, I wish... Dontavion Wicks, I wish we could say he's in this group. That was the hope heading into the year, but he's not. He's having a really rough year. Maybe he's just good every other year, because that was the thing. Like, coming out of Virginia, his second to last year he was awesome. His last year he was really quite bad. Packers drafted him off of the year before. Played really good in his rookie season. Looked like one of their best wide receivers. This year, he's quite clearly been their fourth best wide receiver. A lot of drop issues. Very, probably put him right there with like Diami Brown, Calvin Austin. Shown a little bit more than those guys, so I think we put him right there, maybe ahead of Tolbert. But yeah, disappointing year for Wicks. Hopefully, he can get things back on track. Mike Williams, I think he's a tough player. Probably put him like at the bottom of the true number 2 tier, or like right there as a good outside X wide receiver. Honestly, now that I say that, this is right for Mike Williams. You're not like all these guys, you're pretty damn happy if he's your number 2. That's the definition of this tier. Mike Williams, are you damn happy that he's your number 2? Not with what he's shown this year, coming off the injury from last year. If he can, he just had his first game with the Steelers. He caught a touchdown. If he can get back to what he was in his prime, then yeah, he's right in this cluster. But right now, if we're being realistic, I think you put him probably like right there between Judy and Dobbs. I think that's probably fair. Michael Wilson, he doesn't get a ton of targets because Arizona is very smart about feeding the really efficient players that they have. But I do actually think he's shown to be something like Rashad Bateman, just a capable, like good starter. He's like perfect as a third wide receiver, frankly. Good route runner, good hands, tough dude, blocks, good after the catch. I really like his skill set. Second round pick, and I think he's played up to it. Garrett Wilson, trending. Him and Devonta Smith are very similar. I think he's an alpha at this point. He's been really good. His quarterback play throughout his career has been brutal. Even with Aaron Rodgers has been solid this year. We don't need to get into that, but he has. And Garrett Wilson it's been one of the best wide receivers in the league this year, honestly. So I think this is the first year that Garrett Wilson has had just capable starting wide receiver play, and he's been something like a top 10 guy this year. So, you talk about the skill set, route running, hands, run after catch, athleticism. He is this good. At the bottom of the tier, but it's hard to really argue that he is an alpha top dog. And then Xavier Worthy, man, you got to put him in this group. And then it's like, where in this group? I'd put him behind Quentin, honestly. I would. Just hasn't been good, frankly. He's made a couple plays because of his speed. He had the vertical touchdown week 1. Everyone got excited about it. It was a busted coverage by the Ravens. They keep going to him, and he can't come down with the ball. He gets, honestly, pressed out of the stadium sometimes. He just has a long way to go. I like Worthy, but I think a lot of people felt when Brown went down, Worthy was just going to automatically fill in and get a bunch of targets and settle in and gain confidence. It has not been the case. He really has not been what you could have hoped for here as a first-round pick in his rookie season. So I still believe in him, but he's got a ways to go. Very kind of reminiscent of Quentin Johnston's rookie season. But there you have it. We did it. 103 wide receivers. Again, these guys are all ranked, what is this? I'm not going to count it up, but let's say this is the 24th wide receiver. This is number 1. This is number 24, if you will. And then these guys are more jumbled, being split within tiers. But I'm excited to hear what you guys think, who you would change. You can share out your own Tiermaker lists as well. I just, again, ask if you're putting those on Twitter, just say, hey, it was TFG that made this thing possible. Because it did take time to make all these graphics and stuff. But I really appreciate you guys for watching. This was a really fun video to make. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Subscribe, because we're going to be doing more tier makers throughout the rest of the season as well. And let me know in the comments down below what position you want to see next. Edge rushers, corners, linebackers. Who do you want to see me break down next? We are out of here. Thank you for watching. Peace out.